Begin. So welcome everyone, and I'll call
this conference will now be recorded.
I'm calling to order the South Burlington City Council meeting of Tuesday, September 8th, 2020. Our second, beyond the welcome, our second item is an agenda review. Are there any additions, deletions, or changes in order of agenda items that anyone has? Seeing none, we'll move on to announcements and the city manager's report. So David, do you have anything to announce?
I do not have anything to announce, other than classes have started and so far so good on campus, and we keep our fingers crossed. Tom, are you on campus at all, or are you just remote?
Very little. I'm on campus, just a small amount.
Hey, Helen, you skipped over item 3, questions from the public.
Oh, I'm sorry. You know, that's the second time I've done it. I apologize. Comments and questions from the public not related to the agenda. So I'm guessing, yes, Lori Smith and Larry, or Laurie and Laura.
Laura and Laura.
Right.
So am I on?
Yes, you are. We can hear you and see you.
Oh, great. Good evening. So, I'm here to discuss South Burlington Police response to parties during the coronavirus pandemic. We live next door to a rental house that's currently occupied by 3 20-somethings, frat boys, who really like to have friends over to party. On Saturday, they had around 20 friends over, no masks, no distancing, for a 7-hour party in their backyard deck, which is about 15 feet from our back porch and our back door. They declared they were all roommates and considered themselves family, so they're completely within their rights. And additionally, if you looked at all the cars that showed up, a lot of them had out-of-state plates, so who knows where they were from. The owners of the house live in Queen City Park. We know them. They refuse to do anything about the behavior of the tenant. I called the police department to ask what recourse we had and was told that the South Burlington police don't respond to complaints about parties and COVID. I don't remember the person I talked to. It was a very, very pleasant, informative conversation. So this is not a complaint about that conversation at all. I realize the police have a lot on their plates right now, really don't need more complaints to respond to, but I did some research and discovered there is a policy from the Attorney General related to the governor's executive order concerning distancing and masks. And the governor's executive order states, as of Saturday, August 1st, 2020, Vermonters shall wear masks or cloth face coverings over their nose and mouth anytime they're in public spaces, indoors or out, where they come into contact with others from outside their households, especially in congregate settings and where it's not possible to maintain a physical distance of at least 6 feet. The AG's directive says law enforcement should attempt to contact individuals and entities who are not in compliance with this executive order and request voluntary compliance. And it goes on. So based on this information, I have two requests. Number one is that South Burlington Police be directed to respond to COVID complaints per the AG's directive. I'm sure that even though we're past Labor Day, there will be many more opportunities for parties with young folks and college students who live in South Burlington. And my second request is that South Burlington look at reducing the number of people who can attend a party at a private residence. Many towns with college students are limiting the number of people inside to 10 and outside to 25. I guarantee that based on our experience, there will be many larger parties next door and probably throughout the city. The governor's allowed any municipality to set their own limits on gathering sizes. Thanks for your attention to this, and I will email you the executive order and the AG's directive. I hope this can be dealt with in an expeditious manner. Thanks.
Can I just ask you, do you know which, are they college students or are they just renters?
No, they're just out of college.
Okay,
So
so there's not,
No,
Okay.
no, they're young professionals just out of college.
okay, and
Yeah.
the suggestion to go 10 inside and 25 outside, would that have helped this situation?
They got probably up to about 25 by the end of the evening. So at that point, well, as far as there's two different aspects to this. One is the number, but the other is that no matter what, they had probably close, at least 20 at an average on top of each other on a deck, no masks, no distancing. So that, that in itself is a problem. But the fact that they were right outside our back door and nobody would do anything about it, that there's something that to me, yeah, it's nerve-wracking, and there needs to be some policy that the police could be called and that they would come and they'd educate. I mean, they're not going to bust them. I'm not asking for that, but at least have somebody with authority. We have no authority. The landlords won't take authority. So what authority do we or other people who live around this kind of activity or recourse? We don't have anything at this point. So I'm just asking the city to step it up a little bit around this.
Okay,
Yeah.
I appreciate it, and I can appreciate your concern. 'Cause
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
that's an issue. We're all trying to stay healthy and safe, and
Right. And
It's
they
difficult
don't
when it's-
care. They're 20 somethings and they're not vulnerable to any of this. And we have what am I trying to say? Risk factors, just
Right.
age and everything else. And it's like, come on, guys, you really don't need to be doing this right now. So anyway, but thank you. And I think then Lori wants to say something too. Thanks.
Okay. Hey, Lori.
Hi, how are you guys this evening?
Good.
So I want to start by thanking all of you for the efforts that you've put in to date around the Burton Higher Ground project. And I assume you all know that the DRB made a decision. Their decision just came out today, the actual written decision. I was really disappointed that they did not take into account any of the points that were brought up in the South Burlington letter that you guys submitted, which was,
Lori, can you just restate what the DRB decision was, what it pertains to for the record right now?
well, I don't have it all, but the main focus of the deliberation last week was around traffic after hours. They were particularly
No,
concerned
but
about.
you haven't said the higher ground permit application. That's what you haven't said yet.
Oh, excuse me, the conditional use permit application for higher ground at the Burton campus. Is that what you needed, Tim?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
that's for the record, so we know what
Yes.
we're talking about.
Exactly. So, the decision is in. I just wanted to make sure that everybody on the board knew that. I wanted to appreciate you for all your efforts. The CRC is going to be meeting this Saturday to look at how we're going to proceed and what next steps are, et cetera. We would like to, once we've done that, to give you guys an update and hopefully there will be ways that we can, going forward, coordinate any efforts to see how any adverse impacts can be mitigated. I understand that you guys spent a bunch of money on your legal fees so far, but there may be ways just by support of what's going on to be in line with what's happening, and hopefully we can get some better protections before this thing happens.
Okay,
So
I thank you.
just wanted to bring you up to date, and if you have any questions, great. Otherwise, thanks for all your hard work.
Okay, well, I appreciate your hard work as well. You raised a lot of good questions and issues that needed to be raised, so we all appreciate that as well. We
Well, and
look forward to hearing what your next steps might be, if any.
thank you. And going forward, hopefully we can at least get some infrastructure in place so that residents around here can be safe in the evenings when they go out for a walk.
Okey-doke, we'll do our
Thanks
best.
again.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Lori.
Are there any, welcome, Megan. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak on any issue that's not on the agenda? Okay, no one's turned their little face on, so we'll move on to, again, number 4, the announcements and the city manager's report. So David, you gave us a little update on what was or isn't happening at UVM in terms
Well,
of.
all I said
spread.
was, my students tell me so far so good. They feel comfortable on campus. Students seem to be behaving themselves. Those that live in town say that from what they've seen, students are behaving. And my students all hope that continues. I think the next couple of weeks will tell the story, but fingers crossed, so far so good. And that's why I asked Tom if he'd been on campus much. I'm not on campus at all because I'm remote, and so I'm not supposed to be on campus at all. And but I just thought you folks might be interested in
Yeah.
hearing that from the student's perspective. So far so good, and they feel good about it. But as Laurie Smith just said, it only takes one big party. That didn't happen to be a student party. Otherwise, there might have been a way to go about reaching those folks. But all it takes is one student party like that, and everything can blow up. So here's hoping. Fingers crossed.
Okey doke. Tom, do you have anything to add other than an update on the best maple creamy?
So I just say one thing following up on what Dave Kaufman just stated for our South Burlington constituents that are watching this, and maybe for the other paper if they haven't covered this. It has been announced for some time, but the academic calendar for UVM has been changed for this fall. So students will be not coming back after Thanksgiving. So both first year sophomores are not welcomed back into the dorms, as well as upper class people. There will be no in-person on-campus classes offered after Thanksgiving to reduce the amount of travel. So for whatever that's worth for our community, knowing that there will not be nearly as many college students around the first couple of weeks of December as in years past. And we're very close to approving changes to the spring academic calendar for whatever that is worth knowing, probably starting the semester 2 weeks later and no spring break. So students will be on campus for an entire 15 to 16 weeks straight. As for announcements that I was going to state, I was sorry to hear that we're not having the September 11th memorial this Friday night at 7 p.m. I want to say, as a resident, not as a counselor, and not as anything else, I'm still going to go to Overlook Park at 7 p.m. this Friday just to commemorate that very important moment. And I'm going to bring the kids there. But I understand the city is not really congregating or permitting congregations of those sorts. But for what it's worth knowing, I plan to still go.
Thank you. Megan? Do you have a different update or a similar kind of experience with your students so far?
Yeah, I can certainly confirm what Dave has been saying just by, I am teaching in person. So I am in the classroom with masked students and I am masked, and it's definitely a minority. The campus is certainly not buzzing with activity, and the halls and the buildings are not packed with people either. It does seem that students are taking it very seriously, and I think just reading what they have to write to, since some of them have been writing about it, that they take the responsibility and wearing a mask very seriously. And
Good,
yeah.
excellent. Tim Barrett?
Yeah, not much to report other than the fact that last Thursday I biked up to Long Drive, which is the new access road that goes into the 10 home development that Adam Hergenrother is building off of Golf Course Road as part of the JAM golf settlement with the city. And they were offering some ice cream as thank you to the neighbors for putting up with the jackhammering for 3 months, basically. And so, for every dish of ice cream that was given out, I think that Adam contributed $25 to the Men Look Good in Pink breast cancer, charity. So, and then after everybody pretty much had left, I had a chance to talk to Adam for a while about the development and about the noise issue and the fact that I think they're done. I think that ice cream was kind of a celebration of the end of jackhammering, and I know there are a lot of neighbors up there that are really relieved that that's done. I don't know how much the ice cream assuages their suffering for the last 3 months, but at least it's over for now. I from what I was told, those 10 homes that will be built up there will contribute to the city property tax revenue substantially based upon their value. And so, I think it'll be a good development. One of the neighbors that lives adjacent already bought one of the lots and is going to be building one of the first homes there, and will be selling their house as well. So I think of the 10 lots, only 2 are unsold at this point. So it just goes to show you that there is market demand for that type of development right now in our city. That's all I have.
Okay, thanks. I have a couple things to report. Both Tom and I represented in person the South Burlington Fire and EMS Department's installation and badge ceremony. It was in the bays where the trucks usually are, and it was sort of cool. They'd moved one of the trucks sort of as a backdrop to the ceremony, which was kind of cool. People were obviously very spread out, and we welcome 3 new firefighters and EMS, one of whom is a female, which was very pleasing to me. We have Gabriel Cummings, John Rafos, and Alexis Fojo. Alexis is the female. They come from other departments with experience, some returning to Vermont, one snagged from another fire department, and one through observation, I guess, as she was a firefighter in Colorado, was encouraged to move to Vermont and work here. So I think that's always pretty wonderful to see that. And I was glad that we could attend, and I certainly felt safe because there was a lot of air flowing around, and it was all the doors and stuff were wide open. Then the other thing that I went to this week, if you recall, Kevin sent out an invitation to go to the Eau Claire and Bread and Butter property to meet with a number of individuals who sort of a natural resources conservation group. And I did go because I'm really interested in the whole project. And I have to say it was really fascinating. There were people from the federal government and the state, the Housing Conservation Trust Fund, the Bread and Butter Farm, and myself, and they were describing and discussing their sort of plans for this collaborative of having other farmers creating let me back up. There's a national 501(c)(3), and now I'm blanking on the name of it, but it's this Farming Collaborative, and their goal is to assist with making farmland perpetually affordable to farmers by eliminating their debt and allowing them to, farm the land, but then someone else can buy it. But in this case, in order to buy it, you have to agree that the way you'll farm the land is this process of not growing corn, but using grazing and improving the soil and planting crops that improves the soil. And so the productivity is greatly enhanced. And Bread and Butter is the first farm in Vermont who has joined this consortium, and that allows them to apply for, I think, federal and state dollars to make some of the improvements and be able to encourage. I mean, they're really looking to have sort of multiple kinds of farming that all assists each other with improving the land. Like you might have someone with goats, and they would have their own, it would be their business of goats, but the goats can be moved onto some of the different fields that have some of the plants that the cattle can't eat and that are also detrimental to the soil and making it really good soil. And one of the things that Brandon had commented on is the land that Bread and Butter has worked on for the last, I can't remember how many years they've been, 10 years, maybe 8, something like that. The productivity has improved by 400%. So their vision, I thought was really interesting and worth supporting, because I think as we live through COVID, and who knows what the next pandemic or huge upheaval for our economy or society might be, but having good food grown close to you, I think, is really important. You can't undermine that or underestimate that. I think we saw in COVID that there were shortages, not because Vermonters were eating too many canned peas, but people do these kind of crazy things when they're under pressure and they buy up stuff. And this is a way to really make it available and really add value to our economy and our farm economy. So it was a really, really interesting meeting, and I'm very glad I went. So that's all I have to report. Kevin, do you have anything?
Hi, Helen. I'm on vacation this week, so I don't have a report. We did have a meeting last week with the neighbor to the Overlook Park. Did a walk around the whole property and talked about how we could continue to protect the house from car lights shining in the windows at night and still take the pine trees down. And so we're working toward that end. If you've been by there lately, you may have seen some trees, small trees going up right outside of the stone wall, and that's part of that effort to keep the lights from shining down. But we will hope to be taking those trees down and then sometime this fall and moving forward with the plantings right away. As you know, the paving's completed and it looks a lot nicer. But that's pretty much all I got.
Okay. I meant to make one other comment just related to this experience on the farm. We were all standing outside. It was the first meeting I'd been to in person, and there were, 15 of us, and we were in this great big circle and everyone had masks on. Then the next day I went down to Shelburne Farms and walked around. And one of the things that struck me is that, and I'm sure you've all walked the paths at Shelburne Farms, but the land is absolutely beautiful, and the soil and what they get out of that farm is really high quality food and milk and cheese and all sorts of things. And it wasn't that way 100 years ago, or however long it was, when the Vanderbilts and the Webbs bought the property, but they knew what they were doing. And they don't grow corn there, they pasture. And it just struck me that, you know, long after I'm gone, but maybe my grandchildren will be able to walk the paths on that 600 acres of the sort of Eau Claire, Leduc bread and butter farm going down to Shelburne Pond and, you know, and some of the natural spaces, and be looking at as beautiful and as productive property as Shelburne Farms. And Shelburne Farms has walking paths all on the outside edges of all that beautiful farmland. And I think that's what is envisioned for the property that our city and a lot of other funders helped fund. So it was kind of, you know, long in the future, but I think when you preserve land, it's the long-term vision. It isn't an immediate payback. So, okay.
Helen, this is Sue. Can I make
Yes.
an observation? You have 3 UVM instructors there. I have had no fewer than 20 UVM students volunteer to help at the November election. This has
Great.
never happened before. I had 2 of them in August. They were 2 of the finest young people I have ever encountered. And I think the university should be proud of the kids that they have.
Great. That's good to hear. Maybe they'll help South Burlington too.
I hope
That'd be
so,
great.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's excellent to hear.
Thank you for sharing that. Moving on to item 5, the consent agenda. We have 2 items to improve the disbursements, and then we have minutes for July 20th and 28th and August 3rd and 18th. Is there a motion for approval?
Can I
Kim?
just make one comment first? Yeah.
I may.
So I had an email from Diane Bugby yesterday, who got a glimpse of the draft minutes from August 18th, a couple days ago. And she attended that meeting electronically, and her name is not mentioned. So can we just verbally say that we'd like to add her into that draft and then accept them anyway? Or do you want me to, do we want to pull them and I'll change it?
If Sue is okay, I think we could just add in the attendance list, Diane Bugby's name.
I'm fine.
Is everyone else okay with that? Okay.
And-
Thank you.
Okay.
And I do have a question too, and I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to ask Tom. It is about Rice Memorial High School and restitution. I was just curious what that was about for $125. And the answer doesn't have to come now, but I was really curious about that.
Megan, that would be for the Community Justice Center. So it's outside the general fund. That's the account that Lisa Bettinger has.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So I would entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
Everyone? Okay, moved by Megan. Is there a second?
Second.
Tim, second. Are you ready for the vote? Okay, all in favor? Dave Kaufman,
Aye.
Tim Barrett,
Aye.
Thomas Chittenden,
Aye.
Megan Emery,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. So we have approved the consent agenda unanimously. We'll move on to item 6. It's a council discussion and staff recommendations related to citizen concerns over noise issues in South Burlington. And Andrew Bolduc Duke, our city attorney, and Paul Connor, Director of Planning and Zoning, are going to share with us their thinking or thoughts about what we can do to, not have a reoccurrence of Long Road or whatever it's called, Long Lane,
Long Drive.
Long Drive, excuse me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I don't know who wants to go first. Paul or
I think Andrew's going to lead us off.
Okay.
We have a little PowerPoint to share with it, so we can follow, so folks can follow along. Let me just get that.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'll just, good evening, everyone. Paul and I have had a number of conversations since our last meeting about sort of both the regulatory tools that we have, whether there are some things we can do within those regulatory tools that we currently have to sort of mitigate this in the future, as well as what sort of kind of short-term quick fixes we can do to shore up some of the regulations we have, what are some more medium-term and what are some long-term. So those are sort of the kind of quick hit overview of what our recommendations will look like, is sort of in that kind of what's currently available, short-term, medium-term, and long-term. So I think the first point, Paul, if you can get the...
Yeah, hang on one second. We have a minor technical difficulty at my end here. Hang on a second.
Sure.
Come on. Right.
All right, thanks, Paul. So if you want to get to the first slide here. So we talked about this a little bit at the last meeting, but we've sort of given it a little bit of a deeper look. And one of the things that in looking at other models out there about how noise is regulated, one of the differentiations I've seen between, for example, our nuisance ordinance and other nuisance ordinances, there's both qualitative and quantitative standards. So in our LDR, we have both the qualitative, which talk about reasonableness or disturbs comfort and repose, endangers the peace. These are sort of, I would call them generally subjective terms. And then we also have quantitative standards, such as decibel thresholds. And Paul, do you want to talk about how those are used a little bit in our LDRs?
Yeah. As I said at the last meeting, the most straightforward way to look at that is to think about the LDRs as largely these performance standards as largely being about the operations of a facility. And so if you think about an ongoing noise that something would generate, then that's then we can measure the decibels over the 1 hour average in order to demonstrate something. And this is sort of the last point on the bullet points about being a violation through the environmental court. The way that the court works is that you give people 7 days to rectify the circumstance. So if it's a one-time occurrence, it's difficult to use the notice of violation for a tool like this. So it's really about an ongoing operation, like a generator being very loud, or the machinery within a building being excessive. That's sort of typically how it's been used, but we're going to talk about some additional options in a few minutes.
Sure, and the nuisance ordinance, to differentiate, we typically talk, and it addresses these sort of one-time occurrence or time-specific incidents. So if there's a party that's occurring after 10 p.m., and another way to think about it is there's a difference in who is issuing the ticket. With the LDRs, it's the zoning administrator, and with a nuisance ordinance, ordinance, it is the police department. So you can picture someone delivering a ticket to at a late night party, or someone's doing, let's say, for example, construction at 3 a.m. You can picture an officer being involved. Something that is more long term. That's zoning administrator sort of directed to a homeowner during business hours. Just one way to sort of differentiate. This slide talks about kind of the current regulatory tools, and I just wanted to touch briefly a little bit on non-regulatory tools. The first one being just sort of our general alternative dispute resolution, people being good neighbors, just reaching out and saying, you know, this is loud, and the neighbor doing whatever they can to mitigate that. That's, you know, and maybe it getting to the city level, but that sort of resolves 99.9% of these issues. And that's, you know, I think Paul mentioned when we were talking about this as it relates to construction noise, and his, you know, decade plus working here, this is the first time sort of construction noise has gotten to this level. Another non-regulatory tool is a private nuisance action, which is a common law tort, which any individual can file, or property owner can file against a neighboring property or owner if they're, you know, if the other property owner is unreasonably interfering to their right of quiet enjoyment on their property. What goes along with this is also the ability for an injunction, although typically the remedy is some sort of monetary damages. But I think that's an important part, that injunctive relief is possible between private property owners. And it's something to think about generally when we talk about regulations. You know, what is a private nuisance that is best handled through that mechanism, and what is sort of a public nuisance that's a nuisance on its face, sort of to the public at large. And the last non-regulatory tool is something called a writ of mandamus. And that's something any citizen can bring. It's a petition to the civil court to compel a government officer to do their duty, their administrative duty. You often see it in cases of, or the way I think of it is, mandamus probably has the same Latin root as mandate, and it's to compel a government officer to take action where they have not otherwise taken action. So a zoning administrator is not pursuing an enforcement action. They can go to the court, ask for writ of mandamus, which essentially functions as a pseudo appeal of non-action. And I think next slide, Paul. So what we currently have, we've noticed, does not address some of the issues that have come up. You know, I think that's why we're researching this point. And construction noise, it sort of falls a little bit within both ordinances. It's almost a standalone within the LDRs and the nuisance ordinance, and our two regulatory tools don't interact very well when it comes to that issue. Paul, do you want to talk a little bit more about a couple of those other points? I know those were important when we
Yeah, I mean,
together.
I think that, you know, as I said before, the way that a lot of our standards are written in the performance standards, it really is intended to address the long-term implications of a land use, and that is often very different from the shorter-term action of construction. And I'm sure Andrew can speak about expectation and things like that, but you know, just to use a really basic example, you know, nobody would be surprised that a nail gun is being used to do a repair of a shingle roof, of an asphalt roof, and that's, you know, a little disruptive for the few days that it's going on, but that's part of owning a home and maintaining it, versus the ongoing sounds of a use. And so, as we looked at a gap, we don't really speak about those sort of one-time. It's kind of assumed that construction is a little bit louder, as I said. The example of my nail gun, but there's nothing in there that clarifies that, and therefore that puts us in a little bit of an awkward position with that. And then council had begun a discussion, but hadn't gotten too far about, separate from the specific issue of long drive and circumstances like that, the bigger picture question of noise generally, especially in our mixed use areas. Council talked, I think, last summer about what should the expectation be of residents who live in city center as it relates to trash pickup in nearby commercial areas. Where our ordinance, in this case the nuisance ordinance, speaks about the subject, it divides the city into two categories, residential and non-residential. That's not, as the city has evolved and as cities all across the country have evolved, that's a far more black and white distinction than exists in most parts of South Burlington. There are a handful of areas that are strictly non-residential, and there are a number of areas that are entirely residential, but there's a whole slew of areas in between that we don't really address as to what the long-term expectation should be. So that's a gap that we'd identify.
No, I wanted to touch a little bit about what I talked about before, sort of the differences between qualitative and quantitative standards. And one of the cons, I would say, with qualitative standards, which, to be clear, is what we currently have in our nuisance ordinance, talking about, in many of the clauses, I think we identified one related to dog noise a year or so ago, and it talks about the standard being disturbs the comfort or repose of persons in the vicinity. Other language in the general prohibition, unreasonable noise, unreasonable when it disturbs, injures, or endangers the peace and health. And so those are very subjective standards, and because they're subjective, they can be challenging to enforce. Number one, because there's always there will frequently be, whenever you use the term vague, unconstitutionally vague provision, because it does not adequately provide sort of due process or notice to the actor of violation. So that's one thing we want to be careful about. Vermont historically, or the Vermont Supreme Court, especially recently, has been supportive of a little bit more vague language, talking about unreasonableness related to noise ordinance in particular. But around the country, it is a defect because there are courts who have ruled just sort of unreasonable noise, a general standard, as unconstitutionally vague. A pro, though, of it is it can be flexible. If you talk about decibel levels, I think Paul used the example of a lawnmower. A lawnmower is a very noisy activity, but if we talk about cultural norms and historic expectations, that's something you come to expect as a regular sound in your neighborhood. Whereas, music at the same decibel level on a Sunday morning at 8:30 in the morning would not be. So I think the qualitative does provide a little bit of that flexibility. I think within that, though, is also, I would say, a con, which is that there's a little bit of, it creates the possibility for subjective enforcement, which is also something that I think, as we think about, our different areas, our different communities, and serving communities relatively uniformly, and kind of being conscious about that. In particular part, because such a huge amount of our enforcement, I would say almost 100% of our enforcement comes, particularly related to the nuisance ordinance, comes from citizen complaints. So we're really only enforcing this in areas where there are citizen complaints at this point. Quantitative also has its own pros and cons. If we set a certain decibel level, as I talked about before, we sort of run into those issues around, within flexibility. And we also don't currently have any sort of the sound monitoring training or equipment at this point. So there would need to be, if we were going to pursue a nuisance ordinance that had those types of quantitative thresholds, that's something we would need to invest in. Interestingly, a model I actually looked at and thought was interesting was the town of Williston, which actually sort of has a hybrid model. So it's similar to our model, where it is it talks about the specific activities that are sort of, and hours of time that are sort of per se violations. So any loud music after 10 p.m. Is a per se violation. But it also has, within those allowed times, when having a party or whatever, there are specific decibel levels. So it also has the quantitative standard, and those decibel levels depend on the zoning district. So an interesting concept to think about. All right, Paul.
All right, so Andrew and I talked about a few different things that could be done. We got essentially four buckets here. We thought we'd start with the what can we do immediately, what can we do in the short term, and then medium term and longer term. So I'll jump on, I guess, these first couple of them. What have we already done? So there are two actions that we've taken immediately that sort of specifically relate to this issue of ledge. One is that we have reached out to applicants who are going to the DRB to let them know that for reviews forthcoming, if there's any indication that there may be something like ledge, to be prepared to discuss this subject in front of the DRB, to be prepared. There is some language in our performance standards that addresses this, and I can highlight that for councilors if you like in a few minutes, but we have let them know and they're aware of this. Secondly, we have had one house that has been issued a permit specifically on Long Drive, but it could have been elsewhere, where the applicant did not believe that they were going to be reaching ledge, but there's a condition attached to the zoning permit indicating that if there is ledge found, they must come back to the zoning administrator to demonstrate compliance with the performance standards. That gives the zoning administrator the ability to indicate that the standards are going to be met, or to kick it to the development review board for review as a conditional use. And what we did was we quoted the exact language out of our current LDRs in that. So that was an action that we were able to take immediately and without any change in adopted policy. The first recommendation that we have for minor policy change is, as I mentioned earlier, the land development regulations, the typical enforcement method is through the environmental court by doing a notice of violation. It is geared very strongly towards the resolution of a zoning problem. So if a house is built 10 feet too tall, this structure is meant to have, if going through all the enforcement, to have the house be reduced. It's not a fine structure. However, and I'll get you to in just a second, Megan. However, the state statutes specifically authorize a zoning regulations to be enforced via ticket if municipalities so choose. And so one action that you could take in the next month would be essentially to pass a resolution providing for who the ticketing authority is and what the fine structure is for violations of the zoning ordinance. So that could be things like conceivably noise, or let's say, light levels. That would be a good example. You know, with LED lights nowadays, it used to be that you put in a bulb of a certain limit. Now LEDs, it's really one bulb and it's tuned down to a certain amount to stay in our standards. If, say, a gas station or a commercial establishment had the lights way up, rather than going through a long enforcement process through the environmental court, the resolution to it is for them to just turn the dimmers down on it. Ticket could be an authority to do that. Megan?
Thank you, Paul. And maybe the next slide is going to answer my question. Tell me if that's the case. But the performance standards need to be revised in order for any construction noise to be fully addressed. And so the immediate, it's referring to the same performance standards that have that ongoing noise due to generator or something that occurs, you know, in a kind of regular.
Correct. So there's no change in policy in the immediate one, other than to be posing the questions up front and to be clear, at least within our current regulations, of what we can do. It is not changing it is not addressing this specifically, the distinction of construction from others. So that's the next bullet point.
Yeah, and I would just note along with that, I think the short-term solution, I think, goes well with sort of what we already have in place. You know, it's to kind of round out what Paul was talking about. I think the recommendation that I'm considering is some type of council resolution. You know, a proposed council resolution that would mirror our ordinance fee structures. So under Vermont statute, we can do fines up to $800 a day. And that is, our past practice has been to, you know, sort of have a first offense and escalating ordinances from there. So I think that's part of the idea. I also think that to go back to what I was saying earlier, immediate, already in place, if there are violations of any of the conditions on a zoning permit, instead of going all the way to the e-court for sort of injunctive relief through that process, we could immediately start ticketing if there are violations.
So into the next one here, and this is Megan's exact question, for the medium term, and we tried to be as action oriented as possible. So when we say within 1 month, the last one, that could be in place within a month. Medium term would be to look at the land development regulations and the nuisance ordinance to specifically recognize construction noise as being separate from the ongoing operational noise and to regulate it accordingly. Part of what we discussed was that simply acknowledging it as being something different would be helpful to the Development Review Board, would be helpful to the zoning administrator to give some backing as to why it is being enforced differently than an ongoing operational noise. As Andrew indicated, there's probably a little bit of room in here also to distinguish the roles of the LDRs and the nuisance ordinance in terms of what are they each seeking to accomplish. There is some overlap between them. One would likely want to give the DRB the authority to limit times of construction during certain circumstances, and that may also overlap with the nuisance ordinance having times of machinery operating, but we think having a little more separation between the two would be helpful. And then longer term, this is a little bit more nuanced and probably involves some outside capacity and capability to look a little more deeply into what Andrew was talking about in terms of quantitative and qualitative standards. Council in the last meeting talked a little bit about lower frequency noise generators, you know, thump, thump, thump type things, which are not as acute as some of these others, but may and aren't necessarily measured in the same way, but looking into how to address that. And then, as I alluded to before, exploring what are our options for mixed use environments, and then lastly, what are things that are outside of our regulatory jurisdiction but are significant noise generators in the community. Andrew, is there anything you wanted to add to those ones?
No, thank you, Paul.
And I think that that's basically it. Anything else? We have the language from the ordinance up there available if anyone wants to see it. But that's
Yeah. Sorry, one thing I would note, I do think that our nuisance ordinance, kind of giving it a closer look, and if we are considering amending it, there are some cleanups that I'd like to do. There's a couple of provisions that are, I guess the short answer, they could use some cleanup.
Megan.
Looking at the long term, the 6 months plus, I mean, that's where we could really revise the performance standards to really, meet the needs. So I'm noting that the 3 months plus, we might actually be looking at 6 months plus if we truly, I mean, is there kind of a 3 months plus kind of quick fix, but then could be revised to go a little bit deeper, to think, about more specifics. Because those land development regulations aren't easily amended. Were you seeing this as a two-step process? Like we kind of get to what we can get to immediately, and then we look more at specifics, the finer details for the long term?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we felt that there's some things that could be done within the LDRs to acknowledge, as I said, construction noise as being separate, that gave the DRB some guidance in the short term. I'm never afraid to consider updating something that we've recently updated when we have better knowledge. If that's 6 months from now or a year from now, then that becomes part of a future update. But we didn't want to have the good be the enemy of the great and say that, nothing can be done until we've done a full evaluation of all things noise, because we're aware that the council would like to see something before, 8 months to deal with this.
Well, in large part, we have a number of construction permits that, you want to make sure that we don't have a reoccurrence to the best of our ability. Megan?
And the immediate has already been taken care of, Paul. We're already at the outset. You are, or the planning and zoning director is already discussing with landowners or people who are coming in for the permit, what exactly do you foresee? How long will this take? Those kinds of things?
Yeah, specific to ones that are likely to be or have the potential to do things like impacting ledge. We've not reached out yet to every single project in the city that's doing anything, because for the most part there have, as Andrew said, there have not been problems with most construction in the last decade. But those that have the possibility of ledge or other unexpected loud noise, we've before they've come into the DRB, none have yet come to the DRB because it's that new. But we've let them know, and as I said, with the first project zoning permit for construction that we anticipated that there might be something like this, we attached a condition indicating that they must come back to us if there's any ledge found. And that gives a second opportunity to review this in detail, using the tools that we have, which do include an explanation of the methods that they're using and how they're minimizing impacts. So there is some ability in there, especially if it's attached to a permit.
And
does that include? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
We might have the same question. Does that include the ongoing construction that came to a halt? What if it were to start up again? Is there a way to reach out to
Well, we have, as it relates to the individual house permits, those are separate permits from the road itself. It's our understanding that they are done with the chiseling and blasting associated with the roadway itself, but we're in very regular communication with them. So this would not necessarily apply to the roadway because unless they were seeking a permit change, but for each of the homes on the site, that's a separate permit for each of them.
My question was different, Megan. I was curious because I'm not familiar with either the LDRs or the zoning permits, but is there room for better and more clear, perhaps, contact with neighbors to let them know that this is going to happen, that there's going to be blasting or there's going to be, really noisy construction for a period of time? Or is that just up to the good nature of the developer to consider the neighbors?
Well, that's a good question, Helen. I had a conversation last week with the Act 250 district coordinator. Blasting is subject to Act 250.
Right.
And in that circumstance, there are very specific protocols that the state has laid out about notification and evaluation of homes beforehand. There's certain distances that need to be notified. There's certain time, they need to say X amount of time in advance. And the communication that we've had with them is that in the circumstance of of a place like a long drive or something like it, if there was going to be an alternative that was being used to blasting, normally that doesn't trigger specific Act 250 because it's not blasting. But they indicated to us that if there was a circumstance like what we've seen just recently happen again, that they would likely review the alternative methods being used through the same lens. So that's at their end. At our end,
would they review it after the fact? I mean, we sort of.
No, same thing prior to a future approval. At our end, we don't specifically have a protocol other than to post the notice of the decision or of the permit on the site. That's something we could look into in the medium to longer term options.
Okay, Tim?
Yeah, I guess my first question is, Paul, do you have any history of other complaints besides Long Drive where neighbors to construction sites have called to complain about noise?
The only other ones that I can recall having are we once in a while get a complaint of a contractor or a subcontractor is started early. Right. Start at 6:15, just like the trash haulers, and it happens from time to time, and we immediately call the primary developer, and they contact their subcontractor, and they resolve it. And I have almost never heard a second complaint after the first one.
Right.
So that's the most common. Occasionally, when there's blasting, we do get some concerns. We had a few people call when the O'Brien project was taking place with the blasting on Kennedy Drive. We directed most of these folks over to O'Brien Brothers, and we heard positive feedback as to how those things were resolved. The toughest ones that we got in those cases were the blasting was being done during weekday middays in a non-pandemic environment, so as to limit the number of people who are at home. But of course, not everybody works Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And so the concerns that we got were from folks who have non-traditional work hours. And that's just a really tough nut to crack, to be honest, about how to resolve those concerns. Other than that, we haven't really, about the noise associated with construction, those are really the only buckets that I can recall.
So my point is that anytime you have a construction site and you have neighbors, I mean, if they're putting up steel, they're going to be banging on steel between 7 a.m. because they can't start before 7, and they can't really go. They probably, they probably stop working around 3:30 usually, right? 3:30 to 4. But my point is that anybody who lives in proximity to a construction location is going to hear noise from construction, whether it's trucks backing up, beeping. It could be nailing, it could be nail guns, it could be steel banging. It can also be the radio that the carpenter is using to keep himself, entertained all day long, but that's a different issue, right? But so my point is that so far from what you've said, really the most extreme types of noise that have generated the most complaints in this case happen to be ledge removal via jackhammering. And in that instance, you are proposing a process to deal with that through the DRB and the LDRs, which I think is good. Do we often enclose in a decision a condition that reminds the applicant of the quiet hours of the city that they can't start before 7? Do we do that on a normal basis for applications?
We do not do it as a course of action, as a course. For the most part, people have been very attentive to it, but it's something we could certainly look at adding. We try not to. Often our DRB conditions involve 15 to 20 conditions, and the more that are in there, the fewer that people actually notice. We try to strike this balance between, making sure that the critical things are in there so that they're following them. But we can certainly take a look at that. As we look to this medium-term solution as to some adjustments in support of the DRB, our preliminary thoughts are that there would be some requirement to demonstrate, if you're doing something like removing ledge, what method you're using, why that method, how that method is the least impactful method, and if it can't be the quietest method, why is that the case? And then give the DRB some authority to adjust and address unique circumstances that might come of this, so as to set clear expectations across the board.
So I guess what I'm saying is that so far in our years of experience here dealing with this, that the ledge removal is the most contentious, right? And I don't know how to predict in the future what might be a future annoyance that comes from construction that we haven't encountered yet, but it could happen, but we could deal with it when it comes. So I think your approach to taking a tactical, LDR, DRB approach, and then a long-term strategy for ledge removal at least is a good idea. I think that'll work.
Okay. Other comments from councilors? Comments from the public?
Yes, could I make a comment? This is Beth
Certainly
Zigmund.
may. Who is the
Yeah,
person?
This is Beth Zigmund, 338 Golf Course Road.
Okay, yep, gotcha.
Hi. I don't have my camera on because I'm sitting in the dark. I'm actually at work tonight. So I was first wanting to say thank you to all the councilors and for, Paul Connor and Andrew Bolduc for addressing this issue. I know you've probably put a lot of time into it. So many, many thanks for that. I just had a couple of questions about particularly about the proposal to allow, there was a lot of information that was just presented, but it sounds like ultimately the DRB will have a lot of influence over how specific issues are dealt with when there's ledge to be removed. Isn't there a chance that would put a little bit too much power in the hands of the DRB to simply give a pass to the developer to manage the ledge however he sees fit? Would there be any mechanism for the city council to decide what would be an appropriate method for ledge removal if the DRB were to simply give a pass to the developer and say, well, the only thing you can do is chisel, because I'd also like to point out, I know, Tim Barrett, you said that, basically anyone living near construction noise is going to be subjected to noise. But again, as we pointed out in the last meeting where this was discussed, this was not ordinary construction noise. And I know you came by for the pandering ice cream event that Adam Hergenrother had after the fact, which was hardly compensation for the fact that we lost our entire summer to this. But this was not ordinary noise, and I just have slight concerns that if the DRB is given the power to decide what's acceptable and not in terms of ledge removal, we might find ourselves in the same position in short order. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there. And again, thank you so much for addressing the issue.
Paul, any response to that in terms of?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the under Vermont law, the power and the responsibility to review the methods and the outcomes of development is placed with the Development Review Board, and it's to the Planning Commission and City Council to give them the standards that are appropriate. So I guess that's how I would describe that, is the Planning Commission and you all can assign the latitude that the board does and doesn't have in dealing with something like this.
Okay.
And then,
Megan.
of course,
sorry.
is appeal.
Yeah.
And the recourse, of course, if somebody is not satisfied with the Development Review Board, is always to appeal those decisions to the Environmental Court.
Right.
Yeah, I guess my only concern is that we really revise those performance standards, because I'm not sure how this would have measured up to the performance standards. And I don't know what your feeling is on this. Do you think it would have violated our performance standards, the ledge? I mean, it was audible, the audio recordings that they sent to us. But it's hard for me to determine the decibel level and over the daytime average when they're done at 4, right?
Right, and that's why I think starting with and again, we haven't written this up, but our preliminary thoughts on it would be that starting with a demonstration of what methods are being used that minimize noise first and foremost, and where the minimal one cannot be done for some reason that we haven't thought of, then considering alternatives and limiting their impact as best as possible is really the approach that we were initially looking at. To at least have that on the table at the beginning and demonstrated by an applicant that they're thinking about this well before they get to the point of a permit.
So about at the beginning, does that mean with the planning and zoning director? Or does that mean with the DRB at the beginning?
With the DRB, but of course that means with staff before they ever get to the DRB.
And does that have teeth were it to be taken to court, for instance, with a developer who is unhappy with a decision?
Well, that would be our responsibility to draft something that has teeth to it.
Michael Mitige, or Mittag, excuse me.
Well, it doesn't seem like in the case of jackhammering of ledge, you can limit the noise. But there may be ways of limiting the exposure by limiting the number of hours that kind of work can be done, or staggering the number of days in a work week that it can be done. Because the noise from a jackhammer is the noise from the jackhammer. You can't really change that. But exposure to that noise by the neighbors might be possible through what I just suggested.
And couldn't that be part of the conversation, Paul, when a developer says this is how we're going to limit the noise or manage it? I mean, we can only jackhammer and it's noisy, so we will not do it 8 hours a day, 5 days a week?
Yeah.
Or do we need to be more specific? I mean,
I think that that would be an area where having some guidance to the DRB would be helpful in the standards. I'm not sure that as a staff administrator of the subject that I would be easily able to discern whether a week of 8 hours a day or 2 weeks of 4 hours a day is a better quality. It leads to a better quality, of life, a worse quality of life. So we'll have to think about how to give some direction there. I guess I was initially thinking of, to Michael Matag's point, demonstrating first, is there a method other than jackhammering, for instance, that would be less impactful to look at first? Would blasting, though immediately disruptive to folks, that's typically what's been used in South Burlington.
Right.
And why not? You know, is there something sensitive in the area that would lead to that not being the better option? So having that discussion up front, and also assuring that anyone who is looking to do development has considered these subjects in advance and doesn't get themselves into a position of they didn't research it, they found themselves late in a project and having to do something that they didn't anticipate. So this hopefully helps them to pre-anticipate subjects also by having these things addressed up front.
So what would be the resolution if they got into the process and had underestimated the depth and breadth of ledge? It's kind of like, well, you know, they did some borings and they figured out it was right here, and they, you know, guessed that it was gonna, or estimated that it was gonna be a week of blasting or 2 weeks of jackhammering or whatever, and lo and behold, it's, you know, 4 times that amount of ledge. I mean, what is the recourse?
What's the limit?
Yeah.
Should there be a limit? You know, because if they have to jackhammer for 7 hours a day for a week, is that acceptable, or is 2 weeks acceptable? Like you said, Paul, I mean, whatever it is, if they have to do some jackhammering, should it have to go, you know, should we say that you can't do it for more than 2 weeks straight, period, right? You have to use some other method.
I think those are great questions being posed. We're things that we should look into and answer for you with some ideas. I think, you know, at this point, we're at the stage of having identified some key problems, some short-term actions, some preliminary thoughts, but I think those are great ones to add to it, and that's why we're having this discourse with you right now.
Okay. So is the council's wish that they continue on this process and come back with us with maybe more defined responses to some of the concerns raised tonight, and even to the extent of, do we, you know, would it make sense to find a consultant to help really do the more full review of noise and how to manage it?
So it's Dave. Yes, I think we need to be more specific, and I think we need the guys to come back with more specifics and see if we can nail something down that doesn't have a whole lot of quicksand to it, so to speak.
Okay.
I mean, we can't have this happen again. That's for sure. So we have to have some built-in protection.
Megan?
Just a question, since we're discussing this. What about cross municipal lines? How does the law work, Andrew? You were talking about how residents can, you know, pursue some injunction with other landowners. How does that work cross municipal lines?
You know, I had this conversation with council, sort of outside counsel, recently, and there wasn't sort of a readily apparent answer. I can sort of give you my best guess, which is that as it relates to ordinances and land development regulations, both of those things relate only to sort of the residents of the city alone, but trying to be a little bit creative about it. I haven't sort of completely closed off a notion of some type of private nuisance action that I talked about before, and whether or not a municipality could be a party to that. Again, thinking a little bit creatively there, and it's certainly not a concrete answer, but I think it's something we'd have to ultimately, I think it would be a decision by whichever court we brought it before.
What court would it go before?
So it'd be a civil complaint, likely, possible, especially a private nuisance action. If we were trying to bring it under some other, it would be environmental court. That would be the only other option.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for the work so far. Can we get a copy of that presentation? I need to read it again and sort of get a little more familiar with it.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So if there's no other comments, we'll move on to item 7. Tom Hubbard's going to give us a preliminary financial overview for FY20.
Thanks, Helen. Yeah, we'll switch to finances here. I think I'll begin by saying, I think the fact that we were in excellent financial shape going into the crisis certainly helped us manage the crisis. There's always the need to balance the revenues with expenditures, and we knew the revenues were going to be a challenge for us, especially the local options. And while I shared with you earlier that we finished up the year only $53,000 short in the local option tax fund between sales and the rooms and meals. The sales wasn't too bad. The rooms and meals was significantly down, but we were on track as of February for having a revenue year plus 300, what we projected. So it still took a significant hit from where it was. But because we were so far ahead at the time that we went into it, we only finished up $53,000 short on the local options tax. We hope that's the case this year as well, that those start to climb back a little bit for us. The two most significant things we did was put a budget freeze into effect back in early March, the second week of March. And we participated in the furlough program. I think those two things were the most significant things that we did. We also put a hold on position vacancies. We held off on any training and conferences. And we also put a hold on some of the special projects that we still had left within the last few months of our fiscal year. It's brought us to a place where out of a almost $25 million general fund budget, we're looking right now at about $14,000 to the good. I mean, it's that close. I'm happy that's a positive number.
So am I.
And some of the reasons I'm happy for that is some of the other information I'm going to share with you. On the expense side, we had over $50,000 worth of supplies and equipment for PPE, mainly for public safety, but also for each of our buildings that we had to spend. We spent over $225,000 in additional overtime and upstaffing for all our essential employees. Now, a lot of that was with EMS and upstaffing to a second ambulance service. That was a pretty significant charge. And part of the FEMA requirement is that we also have a separate emergency operations manager on staff that's not part of the responding team. So there were significant costs that we absorbed. We have applied for the FEMA grant. We've applied for the LGER grant as well with the state. and we applied for digitization funds, which would help allow us. We only had 10 licenses for outside residents trying to access the digital records in the city. We now are able to have 25 people at a time accessing the records. So all told, we've applied for $370,000 worth of grant funding, which I don't expect we'll get all of that. You know, FEMA, when they first started, said certain things were eligible. And as the grant program went on, they started pulling out some of those things that were eligible. One of those happened to be hazard pay for our emergency responders. That no longer is eligible either with FEMA or with the state grant. So we're hoping that the majority of the expenditures that we have applied for, that we'll get a substantial amount of that back. I'm confident that will be six figures. Like I said, we've applied for $370,000 worth of funding. How much of that will go back against FY20 and how much of that will actually be part of FY21 by the time we get responses and a final figure from both FEMA and LGER in terms of what we'll be receiving. That will be determined by our auditor. But anyway, we had some significant expenses as part of the crisis that we had to deal with. The freeze on the budget and the furlough program itself was over $160,000 that we saved in salaries. And to finish up on a plus 14, I think, I'm trying not to smile, but I'm just glad it was a positive number. I knew it was going to be that close. And I think if there's any more pushes and pulls that we're going to make, it will probably increase that number a little bit. I'm trying to be as conservative as I can be with giving you a best estimate at this point. So some of the things that we did have to do to make that work, just so you're aware, we had to use all the contingency funds that were in the budget. So those have been exhausted. There was no transfer made to the sick bank fund. That's usually $125,000 a year that we put into the sick bank fund to bring down that long-term liability. That was a recommendation of our auditor a number of years back, and we've done that every year. On the positive side of that, we didn't have to hit the sick bank fund this year. So there were no expenses that came out of it, but there wasn't $125,000 that went into it either. And that usually balances out. So that transfer was not able to be made. And we put a hold on some of our special projects that were left. One of those included one of the garages at Department of Public Works. That was about an $80,000 project. That didn't happen. What we were able to do was the work at Overlook Park, which was about $37,000. We got that accomplished out of FY20 funds. Once we knew that we were pretty confident that we were going to be able to make the budget by the end of June. So number of projects that obviously didn't happen that we'll have to move forward to another year. And we're still on a hold with some of those projects for this year. As you know, we've finished up the Dorset Street paving, which I think was about $425,000. That's recently been completed. I tell you, the rec department and the public library probably took the biggest hits, not in terms of financial repercussions, but just in terms of this is their existence. This is what they do. They provide services to the public at a very reasonable price. Both the library staff and the recreation staff were mainly on furlough, other than the directors of those departments from way back in March. And they're really rebuilding their teams at this point as everybody is back and the library is now open more days. The recreation department is looking at fall soccer, being outside, and has had a good response for participation in that program for this fall. So every department took a hit in a different way. There was no department that was hit in terms of staffing like either of those were. So I just wanted to point that out, and it's good to see that they're both coming back. So
did we lose any individuals who found a job elsewhere?
Not through the furlough program. We had some position vacancies that became available that we have still not yet filled, Helen. And the library is still looking for people there. We were able to fill a couple of the positions that were open that we felt needed to be filled right away. We're still searching for an IT network replacement for Al. So that's an ongoing search that we have at the present time. We still have a hold on one of the positions in the police department. And there's a couple other positions throughout the city that we had been approved for additional staffing, one in the Parks Department and another in the library that we have not filled at this point.
Okay, thank you.
We continue to have a budget freeze on for this year. Martha Lyons is indicating that taxes are coming in pretty well at this point. We hope that continues. Taxes are due the 15th of this month. There'll be a subsequent mailing that will go out to folks, to all residents, explaining the new tax bill and the correction that will be made once we know from the State Department of Taxes what that new rate will be for education tax.
Do we know when that will happen?
I think that we're going to try to get that out in October, just so that people are informed and have enough time to plan for their second installment, which will be in December. We're working with the school district to try to get them their tax payment as quickly as possible. The state statute on that requires us to wait 30 days from their approved vote for the state to then have an additional 7 days to finalize the new rate. That brings us to September 18th. There's a council meeting on the 21st that I would hope to have that number for you for approval, and seek your approval the night of the 21st and do the transfer to the school district the morning of the 22nd through the bank account. So we've shared that with the school district. They know that that's coming. Martha Lyons is working on what that exact number is going to be based on the interim rate that the state gave us. So that all remains in the works. Our audit, the significant part of the audit, will continue the first week in October for FY20, and we're working to close out all our books. We still have the enterprise funds, some of the special funds to go, a little bit of tax administration still left in the general fund budget to finalize, and then we should be in good shape for our audit to be completed.
Okay, great. Any questions? Are you finished? Is that your presentation?
Those are the big points for now, Helen. I think once you have the sheets in front of you, we can go through things in more detail, but at least tonight I wanted to give you an overview of where I felt we were going to be. And a lot for us will depend on how much grant funding we're actually awarded.
Right.
It could be significant. Like I said, I expect it will be in the 6-digit range. I'm very hopeful of that. I think we substantiated the cost really well. We've got good documentation to back that up.
Well, thank you for your good work. Tim, did you have a question?
Yeah, I want to try to net that out for the current fiscal year, right? So you still have a budget freeze in place, right?
Correct.
Oh, and you have some unfilled positions, but the PPE expense, has that gone down or ameliorated in some way? Because it's not like we're in March, April, May like we were before, right?
Correct. And
Okay.
everything that we've spent, we've submitted as part of the grant, Tim, and that's
Okay.
part of the expenditures that we should get fully reimbursed for.
Okay. So between those things and, I mean, I know the rooms, the rooms part of the rooms and meals is not going to improve. Maybe it
Right.
improves a little bit, but sales tax and meals, probably the meals part should improve the next time, I would think, don't you? A little bit?
I'm hopeful, yes. I'm hearing
So-
that the hotels are still around the 20%.
Okay.
Which they're still struggling there. But one of the big unknowns as we move forward is what might go into an appeal, for the appraised value for this year. I know the hotels have already shared with us that that's something that they're going to be considering. That would affect the grand list, even for this year. This is regardless of the tax reappraisal that's being done.
Somebody would appeal the value of the property tax of the property value of a hotel based upon the pandemic performance of the revenue of that hotel in a given year?
That's income statement based, not appraised value
Oh,
for the
income
commercial
statement.
sector.
And then how would we rectify that the following year when they were back to full revenue?
Yeah, then we'd have to reassess.
We'd have to reassess. Are
We'd
we
have-
allowed to do that on just the hotels?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And so Todd LeBlanc is in the process right now of looking at some different percentage levels in terms of what might be considered and what impact that might have on our grand list for this year, for FY21. So I'm just putting that out there. I'm hopeful, that business picks up for them, and that number changes. But I know that they're still struggling for sure.
Are they the only type of category like that they could appeal based upon their income?
I think the mall has had a significant downturn, especially during the spring and early summer. Riding by there almost daily right now, I see a lot more cars in there than I had seen earlier. I'm hopeful that again that they're picking up with business as well, maybe with back to school shopping and such. But that could be another area, Tim.
And the state sales tax, they don't tell you what part of it is based upon online retail versus local retail.
They do not.
Well, we got to get everyone to apply for their $30 to
It's
spend
gone.
it.
No, it's gone. It was gone within an hour. $425,000 gone like that.
Oh,
All gone.
I missed it.
I got 3 $10 gift cards, and then it was just gone. Nobody could get anything,
Well, good for you. You got to share with the rest of us. Deal it out.
That's right.
There was a time. There was a countdown timer on that website, and at 7 o'clock it said 4 hours and 41 minutes and seconds and microseconds. You had to be there with your finger to go boom, hit that thing at noon exactly. It was pretty amazing. Luckily, my employer sent an email out 10 minutes before the countdown hit 0. So, I just happened to look at it and go, oh, I better go do this. And then their website didn't crash, but it slowed way down after about an hour. And then they just ran out of money, I think.
Yeah.
I think
Any
so. but I
other
think-
questions?
Ellen,
Okay.
the only other thing I think I'd share with you is I know you all know Sue Dory, and Sue had hoped to finish out the fiscal year with us through next June before she retired. And I think because of her need for caregiving at home, that's going to happen soon. I think that she'll be with us over the next month or two, mainly working remotely. And then her service will need to diminish. And probably by the first of the year, we'll have, she'll be available if there's any specific question, but in terms of being on the payroll at that point, she'll probably be done with us. So I wanted to share that. Sue has been a great asset to the city. She continues to be. And I know that her heart wants to be still working and helpful in any way that she can. But certainly her need right now is to be at home, and we all understand and appreciate that. And we wish her all the best. She's a special lady and going through a very difficult time right now. But she's been great. I've enjoyed.
Well, we should officially recognize that either with a little letter from the council or a little resolution, because she's worked for the city for quite a few years.
Yeah, I think it's about 10 years. She came in when Sandy was manager. So that'd be great. Thank you.
Any other questions for Tom at this point? All right, thank you very much. I'm certainly glad we are ending with a little extra cash. That's not a whole lot, but that's better than a deficit, isn't it?
Pretty close, yeah.
Okay, moving on to item 8. We're going to hear from Paul Connor, Director of Planning and Zoning, on an update of the status of the work before the Planning Commission, so we can kind of get a handle on where they are with all their IZ work and what to expect.
All right. Thank you, Helen. The Planning Commission, as you know, was not meeting for a period of time during the spring and summer. They started meeting in August. They've had 2 meetings so far, and they have another one tomorrow night. Their work. Staff was quite busy during the meantime in helping to get documents ready for them to review and consider. And so they've really hit the ground running as of their first meeting in August. They've tried to sort of parse out the pieces of the work so that they're manageable to both themselves and the public. And so in their first meeting in August, they reviewed at a high level the draft environmental protection standards. So that included specifically the subject of forested habitat areas and steep slopes and how those would be addressed. At the end of that meeting, the commission decided that they felt that they were generally on the right track, but before making any formal sort of recommendations to you on that, they wanted to look at and make sure that they had a strong handle on the other half of the equation, which is what does the development side of a PUD look like, and being attentive to the needs on both sides of that coin. At their last meeting, which was last week, we had a lengthy discussion on the development side of PUDs, what that looks like, how to shape subdivisions and planned unit developments, how a different way of looking at density through a planned unit development may be able to achieve some of the missing middle problems that we've had and communities all around the country have had around. We see a lot of single family homes and duplexes and large multiplexes, but not a lot in between. So last week was really a presentation on that subject and having commissioners think about that. Tomorrow night they are meeting and are going to be continuing on that, giving, if they're prepared, some direction on how exactly they want to see the development side of the equation be shaped. And that will allow us in the next couple of meetings to then bring the conservation side and the development side together, show exactly where, determine exactly where these PUDs would be applicable, along with the new subdivision rules that really back all that up, and and make sure that they've thought about how to integrate the TDR program into it. So that's where they're at. There's a lot coming at them at once. We've stuck to, we did show the specific language for the environmental protection standards in the August meeting. We did not provide the specific subdivision standards language yet, although it is ready for them as soon as they are prepared to see it, which will probably be in their next meeting or two. We just didn't want to give them a 250-page packet of every single word that we've written. And so that's where we likely are. There had been some discussion during the summer between the chairs and the vice chairs of the Council Planning Commission, Megan and Helen and Jessica and Bernie, about coming to you as soon as they have their broad direction, especially on environmental protection standards. They're still anticipating doing that in the next few weeks to be able to give you an update specifically on where they landed, to A, get your feedback and make sure that you're comfortable and on the same page as they are, and B, assuming that everybody is on the same page, that would allow you to proceed with some of the other tools in the toolbox that that we've discussed, like official map and how you might use the open space fund and all those kinds of things. So that's basically where we're at.
Okay. Questions or comments? Do you have a timeline in mind?
Keeping in mind that it's important that the public have their opportunities to weigh in on the details, and that's often sort of the longest part at the end. It's our hope that in the next sometime in October or November that there would be a complete draft for the commission to be ready to be moving to public hearings on. I think that that's something realistic. It will depend on, if there's dozens of specific questions and comments that might adjust that a little bit, but that's where we would hope to be.
Megan.
Is that public hearings in front of the planning commission or in front of the council?
That's in front of the planning commission. The timeline from when, and we can talk about this under the next item, but the planning commission warns its public hearing. It has to have a complete draft of everything that it's preparing to submit. That needs to be warned about 3 weeks in advance of holding their public hearing. After that, they would take any of the feedback that they've received and make edits to it. That sometimes is pretty short, but it depends on the nature of the feedback that's received, because they want to make sure that they're giving you a product that has addressed the concerns. Once they can vote on it. Once you get it, you can warn a public hearing. And when the public hearing that you've warned is published in the paper, then the new bylaws are in effect.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, well, that's where it's at, and so we'll be waiting anxiously for you to continue and make some continued progress, I guess is how I would say it. All right. Any questions from the public? All right. So moving, sort of sliding into item 9, which is the discussion about the extension of interim zoning bylaws. So we have one more time to extend it for 3 months? Is that right? Does that take us to 2 years? No.
Yes. So staff went ahead and published a notice in the newspaper for your next meeting, your September 22nd meeting, to consider the possible extension of interim zoning. When you do that, that extension would be through the end of 2 years, which is about 2 months instead of the normal 3. Because if you remember in May, you took the emergency action as authorized by the governor to postpone the hearing for a month. And so this would bring you to November 13th. That would be the expiry of the 2 years. At that time, you have the opportunity, if you so choose, under Vermont law, to extend or reenact interim zoning for up to 1 additional year. So the way that the statute works is that it has an initial period of 2 years, and then public hearing, a municipality can extend it for 1 year. You chose to have an initial period of 9 months and then 3-month increments to keep essentially a fire under everybody to make sure it was being done as easily as possible. You will have that opportunity if you choose to extend it beyond that. The statutes don't set any additional criteria. It just says following public hearing, you may extend or reenact. Staff's recommendation would be that perhaps at your next meeting, when you're discussing whether to extend it through early November, you decide whether you want to hold a public hearing to extend it further or not. The last day that you can just make that decision as to whether to hold a public hearing would be your first meeting in October anyway. So that's just 2 weeks later. So we would advise that rather than have this discussion in every meeting for the next 4 or 5, to determine at your next meeting if you choose to extend it this time, whether you would warn a hearing to extend it past November 13th. At that time, you could then decide whether you choose to or not extend it.
Okay. Any questions, Council? Is that pretty clear? Okay.
Oh, did you say
I
our
guess
next
the
meeting's
fires
on
we lit were smoldering a little more than we had hoped. Michael, Mittag, do you want to make a comment?
Yes, I do. Given the workload that Paul has outlined already this evening for the Planning Commission, it seems likely that November the 13th would be a date by which it could complete the work that has been assigned to it under interim zoning. So I think the council should really start thinking now about an extension after November the 13th for whatever period you deem appropriate. But November, December, January, February, at the very least 3 months, but that should be, I think it's essential in order for the Planning Commission to complete its interim zoning work.
Okay, thank you.
So Helen, let me ask, I may have missed this. Paul, you got your hand up, so maybe you have the answer already. Are we allowed to extend beyond November, whatever it is, or are we not?
Yeah, we can extend it for another year if we wish, but we have to have another public hearing to discuss that.
Okay, and we can go in increments to a year too by 3 months, right?
Correct. It's up to 1 year in whatever form you so choose.
Oh, okay, that's what I missed you saying. Thank you.
One piece I failed to mention, and thank you, Michael, for bringing it up. Due to the statutory timelines, just to sort of add that a little bit of perspective to it, we ran the math, and because in order for the council to have a warning in the newspaper, the council has to have taken action. The Planning Commission needs to have warned and held a public hearing. That's at least a 6-week lag. So for instance, in order for the council to have had a warning of new LDRs in the paper for early November, the Planning Commission at their next meeting would have had to have warned all of the full draft amendments. So that's why we're sort of at a time to that, just to be realistic to everyone.
So to make that really clear for me, if you're suggesting that the Planning Commission could be at the place where they have a final draft and have had a hearing, that can happen, you're estimating, before November. And then for the council to act on those recommendations would take an additional 6 weeks in order to make them effective. Regular.
Almost. So from the
missed
date that the commission has a draft that they are comfortable in warning a public hearing on, and that likely wouldn't be before November.
November, okay.
From there, it's about a 30-day lag, maybe 20 days from when they're ready to when they hold their public hearing.
Okay.
There,
And then it's 6 weeks after that?
no, from there, it depends on whether there's any public feedback. So it's after that, they could vote it out that same night that they have the public hearing. You could receive it the following Monday, and 10 days later, it could be in the newspaper. So it could be as short as a couple of weeks, but that assumes that that there's no substantive comments that come. When the form-based code came through, that was largely, everything had been vetted before there was a public hearing, and so there wasn't very much, frankly, that the commission had to address. With the inclusionary, as you know, last year, there were some significant feedback. So it's the commission tries to set the conditions where by the time the public hearing comes around, that there's no surprises, but we can't guarantee that.
All right. Thank you. There's no more comment. We'll move to item 10, and this is, and I think this can be very brief. I wanted to get some feedback from councilors about your thoughts about when we could return to a live format for the council meetings. And then if you're comfortable with the city committees to reconvene via GoToMeeting if they can in the immediately. So I guess that's one question. Are people and maybe Kevin should comment on this. My understanding is 2 committees, I think, do not have staff, but all the others are staffed. And I think Kevin thought that they could handle committees meeting on their, normal, regular basis using GoToMeeting and having the logistics or whatever carried out by city staff. And I guess my question is are people ready? Is the council thinking that that would be a good idea, that the committees, if they wish to meet, can begin? And Kevin, you can comment on the staffing issue.
Yeah, it's we have liaison for most all the committees, staff liaison who would otherwise be attending anyway. And so if we have opened the door to the committees to meet if they feel that they have something that is really important for their mission. And a couple of them have, Recreation and Parks. I think the Energy Committee has met, the Affordable Housing Committee has met, but there are 2 that don't have liaison. We can still figure out a way to deal with that. As far as the city council meeting is concerned, I've been thinking a lot about this, and we're going to need, if we reopen to your normal public meeting format. I think, David, you've indicated that you would not be participating in that. And
yeah,
so
I think I would. I want to stay remote. I mean, it's the prudent thing for me to do under the circumstances.
Understandable. We'd have to find a way to tap David in as a council member. Also continue to do GoToMeeting, and then have the live audience. It's a little complex. I might suggest waiting a little while before you come back into a fully public meeting type of format. People seem to be participating pretty well with these go-to meetings, certainly for the council. And, but we're still trying to figure out how to loop David in, and then how to have everybody in on go-to-meeting.
Well, I think I agree with you, Kevin. It's as we've all gotten used to it. I mean, I use this and I use Microsoft Teams for UVM. I just settle in and get used to it. Overall, it works pretty well. The classes, my students tell me the classes that are a mix get confusing. That's the only comment I'd offer. If we go back in person and then I stay remote, but then you have others that want to comment in the meeting, in that meeting, and that's what'll happen, that want to participate, but they don't want to come in, so they'll be remote. That's when you start to get into logistics challenges, as you might imagine. So somehow, even if I was coming, you still have people that want to participate that don't want to come into a live meeting, and they need to be accommodated. I don't know quite the logistics of all that, but I know it gets a little complicated.
Tim, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to state briefly that one of the difficulties I think I would have is, first of all, if I was going to be indoors at a meeting, I think I'd want to wear a mask, right? And if I'm wearing a mask, the communication difficulties with masks and my hearing, it's just, I really don't, predict a lot of easy communication back and forth. It would be my desire to just remain in this all digital format for the foreseeable future until whenever. I don't know.
Okay. Michael, did you want to make a comment?
Yes, I'd like to support Kevin's recommendation to wait. And I think one of the things we should wait for is to see what happens to infection rates as we have more students returning to college, because that may influence the decision.
Okay. Barb, Service, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I'm gonna just say ditto.
Okay.
As a person who would attend or would want to attend, I try to attend as much as I can. I would not be comfortable going to the public forum, and I think it would be a real challenge to try to manage between those of you who are present and those of us who want to be present.
Okay. I just wanted to bring it up and get the feedback, and I appreciate that. But are people happy or willing to just let the committees meet using GoToMeeting to the extent that they need to? And I think I would encourage them to start up again so we continue to have that public input on our policy decisions.
Yeah, I think that makes very good sense. And there's really no logical reason that they can't meet using GoToMeeting. Let me ask one other related question before I forget. Kevin, what's the HVAC situation in City Hall? Is it the latest and the greatest, or are filters updated to meet the highest standards of the CDC, et cetera? Or don't you know?
Well, we got new systems installed not too many years back, Dave. We also have a maintenance contract with an HVAC maintenance company, and they're very good about changing out the filters. So short of being outdoors, we're reasonably state of the art.
Well, I'm not sure, honestly, I'm not sure reasonably state of the art works anymore. And that's one of my concerns. That's what's one of the concerns of faculty at the university as well. It's got to be right now state of the art, or there's a risk to it. So I just mentioned that, that's all. And that would be one more reason, I think, not to bring people into the building.
Okay.
Just my thinking, my opinion.
Any other comments? That's all I wanted to hear. And I had the conversation with Kevin, and we've heard you. So I think we can, Kevin, you can, to the extent that the administration lets committees know that they're free to, request meeting through GoToMeeting, and we'll figure out how to support the Energy Committee. And there was one other you say?
Affordable housing. I'll take care of that.
Well, they've been meeting on their own anyway, haven't they? Yeah. but
They're
whatever.
really good about taking their own minutes, setting up their agenda and so on, but I'll just facilitate those meetings myself.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
I'll get a note. I'll get a note out, or I'll tell all the liaisons to let their committees know that they can go ahead and open the door again and start meeting.
Good, and I, for one, would encourage them to really sort of get back into the swing of things and, help us with different areas, or continue along in their, with what they're tasked with. Okay.
Okay.
Item 11, council discussion about moving forward with a search to replace the city manager upon his retirement and a review of the job description. And again, I don't need this to be a long conversation. I thought that we should start the conversation and get an understanding of a timeline, because things can just get away from you, and all of a sudden you haven't done the proper considerations and RFPs or applications and interviews, and we really, I think, sort of backing up, I think it would be prudent to have someone selected in April for a hard start at the beginning of May, and that would give them 2 months to work with Kevin. It would give them 2 months to hire their finance person, and that person then could work with Tom. So you back that up. Before that, we need to really have sort of organized a plan, created a committee, looked at the job description, and asked the public if they have other thoughts about inclusion in the job description that is not in it, and then start moving forward. And I'd like to have the committee kind of organized, I think no later than December. So if we spend a little time, we made the announcement that Kevin unfortunately is retiring, then people can start to think about what are maybe some of the characteristics that we should be looking for that potentially are different than when we were looking to hire Kevin. So those are my thoughts, and that's what I just wanted a brief kind of some thoughts or feedback from the council. And we don't have to make a decision tonight, but I just wanted people thinking about what should the process look like and what are we comfortable with. Are there any immediate thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that the governor's emergency order precluded retirements of city managers for at least 1 year.
I heard that.
Yeah, I think I missed that. Was that
No,
today?
it was in there. Go back and look, section 3.14159.
Oh, don't I wish. Tom?
I like your timeline, and I like you thinking about this, and I think forming that committee is really important. So for the council to think about how many people we want on that and what constituencies we want represented, I fully support having some staff, having a couple of staff on that committee, as well as maybe a couple of councilors. I'd also love to get some long-standing committee members, so at least one that's been on a standing committee for a long period of time. I don't know if you want to come back at the next meeting with a draft composition of that hiring committee, but the sooner we get them formed, the sooner they can work out their job description, and then they can start thinking about the process for posting.
Okay. Does that sound like a plan? Should we put that mean, I could work with Kevin on what would make a logical timeline, so it's like on a piece of paper for you to review. And I was searching electronically and I couldn't find the job description we use for you, Kevin, but I think I have it in a hard form. And I didn't get a chance to look through those files, but I'm pretty sure I have quite a bit of information because I was on the committee that hired you. So there is a process that we used, and look who we got. So that worked. So maybe repeating that, you know, as I recall, there was a committee and then they went through a lot of the applications and winnowed it down to, you know, I think it was three finalists, and that's when the council met with them and made a final decision. And then there were a couple of counselors on that larger committee.
So
Helen, do you remember the structure for that committee?
Pardon me?
Do you remember the structure of that committee?
Ugh, you know,
You have,
I don't off the top of my head. I think it was 6 or 7 people.
Okay.
And we, and that may not even have had any counselors. That may have been just public members who looked at all the applications and did some of the due diligence and then, and eliminated a number of applicants that way. And then it was Pat, myself, and I think Shaw. I think the 3 of us went through those 3 and interviewed them and shared our notes with the full council. And then I think the council made the, I know the council made the final decision. I think that was the process, as I recall.
That resonates with how UVM recently has done their presidential search, though there were flaws with that we could talk about, and also how GMT, as much as GMTs got derailed because of the pandemic, we went through a similar process, and I thought it was successful, and we ended in a good place.
Right. And I think as happily as Kevin pointed out, this is a coveted city manager position in the state. So there will no doubt be some real interest of good candidates.
so we might have a ton of applications by tomorrow, you think?
Yeah, maybe. Maybe we could just, you know, get this done before December.
Helen, why don't we, once you and I catch up on this and I can start, we can start working on a draft of a plan.
Okay, that would be great.
Okay.
So we can, yeah, great, good, thank you. Reports from counselors on committee assignments. Any reports? You know, the airport commission did meet. I was on a plane, so I couldn't join the meeting, but
Ironic.
I know, isn't that funny? But there certainly has been some good news with the FAA grants that they have been awarded. Certainly Chamberlain School will get, you know, all the money they need for a new HVAC system. There's money for 3 different noise or sound monitors. I don't know exactly where they will be sprinkled around the area. And then there were some other dollars that were awarded for some of the updates at the airport. We are losing money, as you can imagine. Flights are way down, and we haven't lost any airlines yet, to my knowledge. But we did go into the COVID experience with, I think, 400 days of cash on hand. So that has served the airport well. And, you know, I think an airport has to survive. Some kind of airport has to survive in northern Vermont. So I suspect it will be this one. And, you know, I don't know what, I can't imagine what it will look like after COVID, but it'll be there in my mind. So that's my report on that.
Well, if times get really tough and they need to draw from the local region for support and underwriting them, we should talk about regional governance strategies over that asset.
Oh, I don't disagree. I think that, may be part of the conversation, just because it is such an important asset. And if it really doesn't have the kind of finances through the city of Burlington or support that it needs, then you can look elsewhere. I just can't imagine the state letting it close. I mean, I just don't see that happening.
I only said it with a smile because I'm kind of a broken record on that point, so.
Ellen, do they have access to CARES money?
That's a good question. I will get that answer for you. I don't know. Because they certainly have had to spend a lot of money on, masks and hand cleanser and all that kind of stuff, and just cleaning. I mean, they really do a lot of cleaning, even though there's very few people there. I mean, I literally, when I flew out, I was the only person checking in, and there was one other woman in front of me at the TSA line.
And there's still that $600,000 delta on the Kirby Lane cottages, is that right?
That's approximately it, yeah. So I don't know how that will work out, but
okay. Yeah.
At least they're being, were sold and are being used as they were intended, and thank heavens. I mean, I don't know if they'll be perpetually, they probably won't be perpetually affordable housing, but they will be housing. So we won on that aspect. So.
Helen,
Yeah.
do you know how that housing will work? Is it going to be rented to employees that pay the company, or how will that
I don't know, but I can find out. This was Beta Corporation, Beta Company, and our Beta Technology, and they, as you can imagine, with developing an electric plane, have a lot of engineers working on it, and I think they're just like single guys and gals, early in their career, and they could not find affordable housing. So they were having trouble recruiting the staff that they needed. So these are kind of engineering level pay of renters, or however they're managing it. I don't know if it's part of their compensation or if it's just, we found a house that you can rent and this is the rent. But they must be subsidizing it a little bit. I mean, it's not market rent. Otherwise, they could find rent somewhere else from existing. So it must be subsidized in some way, but I don't know what that is. And I will find out, Megan, and I'll find out the care money too. I don't know. Okay. Ooh, this is an early night, isn't it? That's good. And I added like 3 items just so we would have been done at 7:30. Is there any other business to come before the council? Megan.
Helen, when will we be finalizing our discussion on the trash hauling? Consolidation discussion.
Yeah, I get, you did raise that with me. And I forgot. Kevin, the council didn't say we should go forward with the next steps, although I got a sense that people were interested in that. I don't think we formally said that. That would be my recommendation, that we take the next steps to find out if it's a viable option for South Burlington.
I think where the council left it, Helen, Justin is going to get with the consultants and understand what the next, what the cost of the next step is.
Okay.
And then get and report back to you. I would hope we'd be able to get back to you at the second September meeting or the first October meeting, but the cost of that had not yet been estimated.
Uh-huh. Well, hopefully it won't be more than $14,000 because that's all the extra we have.
So what would the cost of the city entail? Do you have any idea, or do we need to wait till that report comes through?
Well, there's a second phase of the project that the council will have to approve, that we don't have the price tag on that yet, Megan. So
Okay,
that's what Justin's meeting with the consultants about.
okay, good. Tom?
Am I correct, Kevin, on this discussion topic, on this point, that Burlington, I thought I heard Chapin Spencer announce this, that they are suspending action on this for a year only because of the pandemic, and they just have no monies whatsoever, and they were adjusting things, but there was still interest. But if we move forward now, we might be moving forward without or not in concert with Burlington, whereas if we do stall or wait until they're ready in another 6 months or so, we could get back on step with them. Is that correct?
I think that is correct, Tom. I think what we want to find out is what's the differential between us going alone and going with Burlington. I think I certainly saw a lot of head nods from council members during that report, and it seemed like you were all pretty positive about moving forward with the next step in this. So let me find out what the price tag is and timing and all, and get back to you.
Yeah, I certainly had some additional questions in terms of a price tag and whether you have to have one company for the entire city, or can you do, segments like particular areas could be served by the Red Can people, and another area could be served by Casella, so we don't, or Gothiers. I think those are the three, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Myers, Gothier.
Myers, I'm sorry. So, no, isn't Myers the Red Can people?
Yeah, I'm sorry, you're right.
Yeah, so it's Myers, Gothier, and
Casella.
and Casella. So just, there are questions like that I would want to know if that's possible, or if you just play hardball and, just go with one, and hopefully some other community picks up a different one.
To me, the waste district should be the motivating force here. If we said we want to pursue something, they're the ones that should provide the organizational template and then do all the legwork. I mean, once we have an understanding about how we want to implement something, I mean, that's their responsibility, is dealing with waste. I would think that they would want to participate highly in that whole process, right?
They did a study probably 7 or 8 years ago when I was first on, 5 years ago, early in my council career. And I thought it sounded good then. But there weren't enough communities who would buy in. In fact, I think most of them said no. Huh? You probably know more about this than I.
What I recall, and I believe I have documentation that I can share with all of you, but you're right, the study was 8 or 7 years ago, but they concluded the board in 2015, and Justin Rabideau was on the board at that time, I guess, or he was involved in this, so he can inform us. But there was a lot of concern about the county or the district doing any type of consolidation across municipal districts. So there were 9 haulers then. They have since consolidated a lot, so it's less fragmented, but there was a lot of pushback from the haulers for any county-wide initiatives. So the board actually has a motion, and they passed it, that they do support consolidated service, but they want each town to figure out what works best for each town. And so they basically tossed it over to the South Burlingtons, Burlingtons, and Winooskis to do what we're doing now, which is to think if we want to apply some form of consolidated service like they have in Westford. Westford has consolidated service like they have in Brattleboro and elsewhere in the state. That's what I recall of this, but Justin Rabideau knows this inside and out, and I'd love to have more conversation with him about it, because I do think it's an opportunity for us to do things better in South Burlington.
Okay, but good point, Tim. All right, well, thank you, Megan, for reminding us, and that's what we'll wait to hear. So if there's no other business, I would like a motion to adjourn the meeting at 8:53 p.m.
Wow.
Congratulations to all of us. Great.
Well, all right, so that's a motion and a second. All in favor? Yay.
Yay.
Hi.
Dinner time.
Yeah, we're just thinking of you, Kevin, knowing you're on vacation. We didn't want to make this a late night.
Are you in Florida?
In his office.
He's at this office. It's a vacation.
Yeah.
Why would you go to Florida and catch the COVID? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you didn't go to Florida. Megan, how's classes so far?
Great. I mean, strange, but great.
Yeah, right.